Two people were exploring an underwater cave, but as they swam back up, they ran out of oxygen. Worse still, they took the wrong path and entered an unknown area. This desperate situation happened in Texas, USA. In Jacob's Well, San Marcos, there's a spring here, about 4 meters wide and 7 meters deep. Oval-shaped and blue-green. Locals call it Jacob's Well. Over the past few decades, it has claimed more than 10 lives. And all of them were experienced divers. Because at the bottom of the cave, there is a hidden opening that leads to another mysterious world. A cave depth of 100 meters with a complex underwater structure. The cave's system has 4 main chambers. The first is the blue hole, where visitors are. The second lies between 7 to 50 meters deep. It has many branching paths. It's easy to get lost once inside. The third chamber is more open and relatively simple, located 50 to 75 meters underground. The fourth lies between 75 and 90 meters. It's even larger, but difficult to access, because the passage connecting to the third chamber is extremely narrow, and the entrance is often blocked by falling debris. You have to clear rocks just to pass through. Most of the deaths that happens occur here. In 1979, 2 divers tried to return from the fourth chamber, but discovered the exit was blocked by fallen rocks. The 2 of them desperately tried to clear the debris, but eventually died after running out of oxygen. A few months later, local rescue team, temps, and the rest prepared to dive into the fourth chamber to retrieve the bodies, but he also got trapped in that passage by the debris. Tank kicked away the debris desperately to escape, but his oxygen tank was depleted, so he had to share oxygen to make it back to the surface. But because he ascended too quickly, the huge pressure difference caused the air inside him to expand rapidly. His stomach swelled up like he was 9 months pregnant. He only survived after emergency treatment. This experience made him realize the cave was extremely dangerous. Repeated rescues left him exhausted. So after recovering, they sealed off the fourth chamber with steel bars. During his own diving classes, he constantly warned his students not to explore Jacob's Well. But 2 students were rebellious. After hearing his story, they became even more eager to go. Their names were Richard Patton and Clark McConnell. They had no cave diving experience, only basic open water certifications. Thames had repeatedly said these are completely different types of diving. But driven by curiosity, they decided to try anyway. On the morning of November 23, 1983, Richard and Clark secretly entered Jacob's Well. They successfully passed through the first 3 chambers and reached the entrance to the fourth chamber. They were lucky. The debris in the passage had already been washed away, and the barrier Thames had installed had been removed by some other diver. He even left a provocation sign at the entrance. It read, "Don't think you can keep us out." You have to admit, that's incredibly bold. Going in knowing there were bodies inside, Richard and Clark thought luck was on their side, so they immediately headed for the fourth chamber. Since the passage was too narrow, they had to remove their tanks and push them through by hand. Richard was the first to go in. When he reached the fourth chamber, Clark followed after. But while swimming, Clark suddenly noticed Richard started swimming back in pain. His tank was nowhere to be seen. Later they realized it had been crushed by falling rocks. He had to hold his breath and swim back to find Clark. Seeing this, Clark quickly put his regulator into Richard's mouth. Richard gasped for air, similar to what happened to Tang. They had to share one tank to get out, since they had just heard how Thames nearly died from ascending too fast. So they deliberately slowed down their ascent. But that resulted in another problem. By the time they reached the second chamber, their oxygen was running very low. But thinking they were close to the exit, they didn't panic much. At this point, the cave was pitch black, because the entrance is curved, so sunlight couldn't reach inside. As they swam, they suddenly heard a sound above them. It turns out their tanks had hit the cave ceiling. They tried to find the exit by memory, but couldn't find it after searching around. That's when they realized they were lost. They had entered a completely unknown passage. They had definitely taken the wrong path. To exit from the second chamber, they needed to take the main central passage, but instead, they went into the left passage. That way was a dead end. To escape, they had to dive back down to the main path. Clark figured it out, but couldn't communicate it to Richard, so he signaled him to follow. Clark took a deep breath from the oxygen tank, planning to swim back while holding it. After diving down 7.6 meters, he finally reached the main passage, then ascended another 8 meters to find the exit. At this point, he was almost out of breath, but he pushed on and kept ascending another 7 meters. When he surfaced, he gasped for air. But when he looked around, Richard was nowhere to be seen. Had he gotten lost again? He waited for a while, but Richard never surfaced. Clark realized something was wrong. The remaining air wasn't enough for Richard to survive this long. Clark quickly called for the police. 50 minutes later, Tang arrived with a rescue team. They immediately began searching. They eventually found Richard at the bottom. But he had already drowned. No one knows why he didn't follow Clark out to escape. Maybe he didn't understand the signal. Or maybe it was too dark, and he couldn't see where Clark went. In the end, he was left alone in the cave until his oxygen ran out. It's hard to imagine how desperate he felt, how terrified he must have been. Tang never expected that despite all his warnings, people still entered the cave, and they were his own students. But Richard wasn't the last victim. A year later, another person died in Jacob's Well. Tang was the one who recovered the body. To fully understand Jacob's Well, in February 1984, the cave management organized professional divers to conduct a detailed survey. During the exploration, they recovered several more bodies. No one knew who they were, or when they had even died inside. A week later, they mapped out the cave's structure. After passing the fourth chamber and going through a narrow passage, there was another chamber. They called it the fifth chamber. What was terrifying was, there was also a body there, reduced to just a skeleton. No one knew if he got there himself, or if he died elsewhere and was carried in by the current. This discovery raised the death toll in Jacob's Well to at least 12 people. In fact, there's another passage below the fifth chamber. There could be more bodies below, but for safety reasons, they decided to stop further exploration. After the survey, at the entrance to the second chamber, they installed a reinforced concrete barrier and put up a warning sign to keep explorers out. After that, Jacob's Well had no more diving accidents. But no one knows if someday, maybe someone will open it again. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.